Hello guys, welcome back to Zodiac Trading. Today we're going to talk about Chinese systemic crisis, Chinese financial crisis, and also we're going to talk about Chinese yuan. I'm going to share a little bit of my views on these assets, and I'm going to give advice of investors how to trade and invest them. And I've been saying uh, the Chinese risk, have been unfolding for quite some time. I've been making a lot of videos talking about Chinese systemic risk. I've been saying, um, what the Chinese government want to, they basically try to fool the Wall Street and foreign investors so they could get out. Like every time when you see investment banks and Wall Street uh, telling you some assets probably good and kind of go for bull market, it's either late it's either they're being late or they just try to get out from the status quo. So from this perspective, I think most Wall Street investors and Western financiers right now trying to get away from China. And as you know, a lot of money been flowing to Singapore, and because a lot of Westerners have um, questioned the integrity and also the business environment would be as solid as it used to be from the last 20 years. So let me just first start from explaining how Chinese shadow banks will lead to systemic crisis, financial crisis. These could be bigger than Lehman Brothers. I mean, a lot of people question that, and some people actually believe that Chinese government has the policy tools and all of the necessary facilities and policies to get over this. But I strongly disagree with that. The reason is because the shadow banking, the scale, the scarcity of these, the scale of the shadow banking is huge. Okay, so basically lots of Chinese property developers been raising money from these shadow banks. And most of the shadow banks, for example, like Zhongrong and Zhongzhi, and they're calling this trust, but they are not like actual trust because in the Western definition, the trust is something to, if you get caught or you're being sentenced in jail, your properties will belong to because you're transferring your ownership to the trust fund. So your assets not likely going to get, confiscated by the authority. But in Chinese sense of trust, in Chinese they call this 信托. It's not actually 信托. It's basically a shadow banks, and it doesn't separate the ownership. It doesn't really has the same function as the trust. What they do is they are just intermediary between um, the property developer, people who need of money, and people are willing to lend out money for juicy yields. And so basically, these shadow banks serve as like an agency. So they connect the people who in need of money and people who would like to lend money for juicy yield. Um, Back then, a couple years ago, when Chinese asset was in the giant asset bubble, the underlying asset value grows. So that's why people are making money. And are uh, if you are just very rich and wealthy clients, if you have like more than 3 million renminbi in liquidity, they will try to persuade you to buy one of these, the so-called WMP, wealth management product, and they will mark a very juicy and attractive yield, something around like 11% and 13%. And that what they're trying to sell you is that what could go wrong, because this is the the Zhongrong and all these agencies, they try to sell you the fact that these are national-owned companies. So that's why you have a Zhong, the Chinese character Zhong. That means it represents um, the domestic ownership from the government. But actually, Zhongrong and Zhongzhi, these companies are not actually owned by the governments. Um, these are not. These are most likely to be owned by individual and couple families. So this is really confusing for foreigners because if you try to start a business in China, you need to really understand, tell the difference. You can't actually tell the difference by the meaning of it. And there is no law, there is no transparency. So sometimes you see some companies start with a name with a zhong. For example, like Chinese petrol company, they start with a zhong, right? And then a lot of domestic owned companies, they all have a name of zhong. So these agencies know how to comfort their investors by changing their name to Zhongrong and Zhongzhi, so it sounds more like government is going to bail them out. But actually, it's not a government subsidiary. But these license, you need certain license to be an agency. So the government issue uh, these agents these license so you can raise money publicly, and that license is a scarce resource. Okay, so the government remain with a ambiguous relationship with these funding facilities and funding agency. So it's difficult to say that they don't have any connection. You cannot say they don't have any connection, but on the other hand, they are deeply connected. All right, so this is what happened to most of the companies, how they operate in China. You need to have these ambiguous relationship, we so-called guanxi and relationship with the government, so you can get license, authority, and all these necessary resources, so you can make the big money. So what happened is these agency they try to put a juicy yield, and they're trying to sell these WMP, and then when they raise the money, they use this money to buy lands, to buy properties, to buy, we're talking about small stocks. We're talking about, those, we're not talking about like major, huge value stocks. We're talking about, more of a mid, small and middle cap of stocks. They're trying to manipulate the stock prices of these stocks, and through acquiring these money. So they get this money from investors, they borrow it, they promise they're going to pay attractive yield, and then they use this money to buy lands, to buy houses, or to lend money to the property developers, or simply use this money to buy, like very small and mid and small cap stocks, so they can manipulate the stock prices and then sell it. Then they have these pump and dump afterwards. They make quick profits. So this is how the Chinese shadow banking industry, how they operate. Because there is a significant conflict of interest here. If you are serving as an investment banks, right? Are you like an investment banks, or are you not investment banks? In the same time, you have the power to raise the money, and in the same time, you also have the function of investment banks, right? So there is no authority limitation on what asset you can actually invest, or they put on those requirements of transparency. You don't have to, expose your investing plan to your clients. So if consider yourself as a client, potential clients of these WMP, the only information you know is that you are you are investing, or say you are lending money to a project highly connected to Chinese governments ambiguously. And at the same time, you know your money is going to get back 100%. Why? Because it seems the government says so. But the government, they just create that kind of imagination for you to think that, oh, the government's always bail out your WMP. But actually, for the matter of fact, the government would not bail out these WMP. So that is how, and that is precisely why the leverages in the financial system quickly escalate. And you have more and more leverages. And what you do is you gradually, when these assets don't provide as much profits, it would just become like a Ponzi scheme. What is a Ponzi scheme? Is that you promise your investors with certain percentage of return, but you are unable to provide that. And afterwards, you decide to use the next people's money to fill the hole of the last investors. Then that just become a Ponzi scheme. So this is actually how the Ponzi scheme work, and that this entire Ponzi scheme had been running, and up to now, we're seeing the most of the housing bubble collapse. We see Evergrande company suffers. We see major Chinese property developers right now bankrupting. That, I mean, they would not try to say they won't say they have bankrupted. They would never say that. But they are, in fact, technically speaking, they are bankrupt. Okay, because in Chinese way, it's kind of losing face. It's not very honorable to say that you're in default or say you're in bankrupt. So what happened to Bi Guiyuan is the garden real estate developer. It's the same situation, and because of these agency, they are the main source of the major funding source of these property developers. So you see, if Zhongrong and all these agency have problem because these shadow banks act like investment banks, but in the same time they have a power of commercial banks. That means they can attract people to deposit in the banks, and they don't have disclose. They don't need to disclose anything, and they could just run these Ponzi schemes. So now you're seeing these companies having big problem. So the governments, obviously, the government can, there is so little things the government can do right now because of the yuan, the exchange rate of yuan, and also the economic status quo. That means Chinese economy is really weak, so there is nothing that the government can do. I mean, the government could do several things. For example, first, it could help with the debt structuring, help to structure debt, default maybe some of the debt, and probably renew some of the debt and inject some liquidity, forcing some domestic owned companies to give uh, loans or maybe to purchase these these real estate developers' assets. They can do that, but the thing is, the leverage is too huge. Even though you manage to restructure this debt, but it's still too big. It's still too big. I mean, these last large companies, you could buy Apple. I mean, the debt scale is pretty much just like Apple. The value of Apple and value Apple company. Apple Computer is a very big company. So how are you going to fix that black hole? So that's what's happening right now. So this could be viewed as another Lehman Brothers moment. These Zhongzhi and these Zhongrong could be viewed as Chinese version of BlackRocks. So are these BlackRocks having problem? How is naturally it's going to affect the real estate developers. Okay, then we just move on to Chinese yuan. Right now, the Chinese government is trapped in a liquidity crisis. Because, because the Chinese government can only print money in the same time. It cannot stop printing money, but in the same time, you have the leadership forcing the central government to increase or escalate the yuan intervention. But the problem is how. You have a lot of money, you know, uh, outflow. You have huge capital outflow, and then in the same time, your currency is very weak. Even though your currency is strongly manipulated and it's a it's a rigged forex system. Even though still have problem. I mean, um, you have no liquidity. So that would be the major reason why the onshore yuan market, the onshore yuan, would just keep failing. And I think it's very highly likely that the yuan is going to drop below 8. The Chinese yuan and dollar, that that is probably going to drop towards 8 per dollar. So right now we're going to see more things are going to happen. Even though PBOC trying to use very strong fixing, but the problem is PBOC not, it's not going to have enough dollar. I mean, the whole world doesn't have enough dollar. So quickly we are going to through another dollar liquidity crisis as long as the bond liquidity crisis. So that's what I believe from the recent market movements. So I hope you learned something. I hope that maybe you would take some advice. So to wrap everything up, my suggestion and my advice would be stay away from Chinese assets. If you have any Chinese assets, this is the time you sell at all cost, and do not think that you can, do not think of, maybe you're losing money. I mean, the biggest loss would be that you lose everything. So right now, if you still have something left, this is the time when you sell them. Otherwise, there won't be another exit window. So thank you guys for watching. I've been sending these really serious signal for a long time. Now the market has verified my opinions. So I think if you enjoy learning investing, please subscribe and share my video with other friends. You can also join our Patreon and we have our special groups. We discuss all sorts of investing opportunities and trading opportunities on daily basis. So thank you guys for watching. I'll see you in the next episode. Goodbye.